Welcome to the Eastern Avenue Library. This is a long-awaited program, and we're really excited. There's not. Can everyone hear me if I kind of talk really loud? I just don't want to mess up the recording, because if there's a microphone, sometimes it's wonky. But my name is Catherine Whalen. I am the Special Collections Supervisor for the Richardson Sloan Special Collection Center. We love working with the City of Davenport City Cemetery and our other friends at the Scott County Historic Preservation Society. And so we are so pleased to have Chad come here, but I will let Corey do some more introductions for us. So there we go.
Thank you. My name is Corey Darnell. I'm a volunteer at the Davenport City Cemetery. And I want to thank our sponsors, the Davenport Parks and Recreation Department, Davenport Public Library, and the Scott County Historic Preservation Society for making this presentation possible this evening. So the Davenport City Cemetery Partnership has a mission, and part of that mission is to educate by broadening the understanding about the past, present, and future importance of the Davenport City Cemetery. So why are we here this evening? One site in particular in Davenport City Cemetery has sparked the interest of the citizens of Davenport for decades. It's a 16 by 16 square foot lot on which Heinrich Oldendorf constructed a brick vault in 1869. Unknown was why and when this vault was covered with earth. The Davenport City Cemetery Partnership approached the city of Davenport and asked for assistance to investigate the structure using sound scientific approaches and modern techniques. And without spoiling the ending to this story, I want to introduce Chad, who's going to tell us what he found underneath the ground.
No elephants. Thank you, Corey. And thank you to the library and everyone involved for having me here. As Corey mentioned, my name's Chad Goings. I live here in Iowa, in Washington, as we can see up there. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, a master's in anthropology, and then I went to try to get a Ph.D. in Geo-science, and I've got all the coursework finished, but I just didn't finish my dissertation, which is why you will see I like to put Ph.D., A.B.D., all but dissertation. So you can't, I would like for you to be able to call me Dr. Goings, but not quite. So almost there. And so as Corey mentioned earlier this year, I went out to the Davenport City Cemetery and been speaking with Corey on some of these issues they were having with this particular lot and trying to figure out what is going on, because obviously, you know, there's this mound of dirt and then there's just grave sites with cemetery stones all around it. And so it definitely sticks out. And so there we go. So I brought a piece of equipment called ground penetrating radar. And it is one form of what is called remote sensing. And so you might say, what is remote sensing? And so my basic definition is here on the screen. It's a way to learn something about an object or objects without coming in direct contact with that object or objects. And so obviously we weren't going to go out and get a shovel and start, you know, we were going to get in direct contact with what is underneath this surface here. So we needed to use some kind of a remote sensing technique to, you know, to learn something about what is down there without actually coming in direct contact with it. And so there's two types of remote sensing. There's what's called passive remote sensing and active remote sensing. And I'll talk about passive first. Believe it or not, right now, all of us are using a form of passive remote sensing. So if you, you at home or you here in the audience, if you well, I'll hold up my bottle of water here. If you're at home, I don't think you can see me, but if you can, I'll hold this up. Now, if I just showed you this, you already knew that it was a bottle of water, right? I didn't have to tell you that this was a bottle of water. So there's this electromagnetic energy all around us. That's the biggest word I'll use tonight. Electromagnetic energy everywhere. And we can see a small portion of that energy. We can see the visible portion, the visible spectrum, the visible light. And we take that in through our eyes, and we process that in our brains. And we've seen bottles of water before. So passively, we know by looking and seeing this electromagnetic energy radiating and focusing in on this, that this is a bottle of water. So we kind of have some background knowledge. You didn't come in direct contact with my water. So it's a form of passive remote sensing. There, I talked to the City of Davenport's GIS department, and they have, GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. And Kevin Randall, who works at the City of Davenport and handles their GIS department, has the capability to use a drone. And so he was kind enough to fly over the cemetery and create a drone image. Now, the drone is a remote sensing tool as well. So there are multiple remote sensing tools that were used in this project. And so I'm sure you've all heard of drones before, but it's an aircraft. It flies over in a systematic fashion and captures, like we do with our eyes, it captures electromagnetic energy. And it could take very high resolution photos. Now, this particular one is kind of giving you a bird's eye view, and you can see the mound. And for those of you, I'm sure a lot of you have been to this particular site, this mound site, and so you could see the surrounding cemetery stones there and the mound, and so the drone is also capturing the visual part of the electromagnetic spectrum, like we do with our eyes, except for in this case, it's capturing it and storing it as images on a computer that can later be analyzed. And so with us, we're using our brains to pick up on what we see here with the electromagnetic spectrum in the visible range. But when we use pieces of equipment like ground penetrating radar or drones, it's nice to take that information and put it into a computer and have the computer do some analysis on that. And so one other example I wanted to show you of a passive remote sensing system is this is an aerial image taken from a satellite of the cemetery. And it's showing the infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. So you can see on the right there. So this energy exists as waves, okay? And we can see the visible portion, but we can't see things like radio waves or infrared or X-rays, unless I'm going to talk about a movie that's really old here, but The Terminator from back in the 80s. If you remember The Terminator, he had a computer in his brain, and he could see the thermal energy that, so he could see if somebody was coming or behind a wall or something like that, right? But this is showing the infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that's captured by a satellite. And it's this type of passive remote sensing is useful for vegetation changes. So you can kind of see the red on the red changes on the trees. And so certain trees might give off a certain segment of that infrared portion, and certain trees might give off another. So it's a good for determining differences in vegetation and health of vegetation and things like that. But so that's a passive remote sensing system. So you're just kind of taking what's there and analyzing it and making decisions about it. Excuse me, I said active, but I meant passive. Active remote sensing is where the user sends out a signal and then measures how that signal responds to objects when it comes in contact with it. So there's some active component to it. You're not just passively taking in the energy, you're sending out energy and then measuring what comes back, how that energy comes back. And then you could put that in the computer and analyze it. And so I gave you a human example of passive remote sensing, and it's Halloween, it's October. So I thought I would give you a relevant animal use of active remote sensing. And so that is in the form of a bat. So most of you are probably familiar with this, but bats use echolocation. And so they will send out these high frequency noises with their mouth, and then it will bounce off things and come back to them. And then they know they're not going to fly into the side of a cave wall or something, you know, and smash and splat on there like on an old cartoon or something. So bats use a form of active remote sensing. They send out these high frequency noises, and then their ears pick them up, and they then are aware of how far away they are from something or how close they are to something, which is useful in caves where they like to fly around and hibernate, because you've been in a cave before without a flashlight, it gets pretty dark in there. So, and they're nocturnal, they like to fly around at night. So it's very useful for them to have developed over time. Ground penetrating radar is an active remote sensing technique. So this is a picture I took from earlier this year. And as you can see, I've been boycotting the barber since this picture was taken. So this is what the GPR, or the ground penetrating radar, looks like. So if I say GPR, I'm just mean ground penetrating radar. It's a mouthful. So GPR, this is what it looks like. Okay, so it looks like a push lawnmower, right? And there's different sizes of them. This is just one particular ground penetrating radar that works well for this type of work. And so the bottom part that I have the word antenna by is the antenna, and it sends out a radar pulse into the ground, and then that radar pulse bounces off things and comes back and is recorded in the tablet there. So I've got a tablet that sits up there where I can see what's going on and make sure I'm getting it's doing the right thing and recording the right thing, and recording the information as I'm going across an area. And it's always helpful. You don't necessarily need a GPS. I'm sure you've all heard of a GPS before. Global Positioning Systems is what that stands for. And we all have them in our phones, right? When if we want to navigate around a busy city or something, we'll use a GPS. And just as an aside, a GPS is also a form of remote sensing, and it is also an active remote sensing system, in that the satellites in the sky are sending out signals, and the GPS has a receiver that accepts those signals. And if you get enough distance on those signals, you can get a location. And so GPS is an active remote sensing system. So lots of remote sensing systems were involved here. That we used was able to use a drone data and the GPS, and then of course the ground penetrating radar. And so what you do with this is you just push it like a push lawnmower across a surface, and it's sending out those signals as you go. And then those signals can bounce off things that are in the ground, come back up, and be recorded in the system. And so obviously the closer they are to the ground, the quicker they're going to return. So it's a timed thing. So it's going down, it hits something, comes back, and you're measuring the amount of time that radar went into the ground, hit something, and then bounced back. So to give you an example here would be, so you can use ground penetrating radar for all sorts of different techniques. And one area is in utility mapping. And so, you've heard the call before you dig, because you don't want to be out in your garden and digging in a hole and electrocute yourself. So they send someone out, and normally those people don't use ground penetrating radar, but they could. And it's used quite a bit more in road construction, or you can even use them inside of buildings. And if you could get an antenna about this big, the people at home may not see, but really small, and you hold it with your hand, and you can run it across a wall with your hand, and it sends in the radar into the wall and back to see where buried pipelines might be in the wall, or electrical lines, or whatever that might be. So in this case, you can see by the arrows here, it's shooting the pulse down into the ground and bouncing off a pipe in this case. And so when you get back the image, you will get what's called a scan, and then where it bounced off, those things are called hyperboles. And so you can see on the right here where that is going over the pipe, and as you're approaching the pipe, you can kind of imagine it going uphill because it's sending out the radar and bouncing back. And then when you're on top of the pipe is where that red plus is, if you can see it. So when you're on top of it, you're at the top of the mountain, and as you go away, you're going down again. So those are something you want to look for in your scans that you're doing, these things called hyperboles, because that's where you've hit something underground, and you can know where you're on top of it by going to the top of that hill. So this is not from Davenport, but this is, I think, shows a good example. And it's from another cemetery by Rhinebeck. And just to show you how these line scans work. So if you can, I don't know how well you can see the white dashed line there in the picture on top. And so if I took that ground penetrating radar, the push mower there, and went along that line, and so the beginning of that line is on the bottom image, it's on the left-hand side, and the end of the line is on the right-hand side. And you can see those hyperboles, and they match up with headstones. And so so that's kind of what you're looking for. And so you get these return scans. So that's what you're seeing on the bottom here. And along the left-hand side, you're seeing depth, but really it's kind of you need to estimate that. It's really time. It's how fast the radar, the time it took for the radar to go down and the time for it to bounce back up. And so you kind of have to know a little bit about the soil that you're dealing with, because this radar pulse will travel differently through more wet soil than it will through more dry soil or through more sandy soil. So you kind of have to have an idea of what kind of soil you're dealing with, and just generally speaking. So you'll kind of lump it into categories. Is it a loamy soil or clay soil, et cetera? And that will kind of help you figure out how fast that radar pulse went into the ground and is bouncing off things. So here we've got the drone image back again, and what you want to do is you kind of want to systematically go over your study area. So for me, it's this 16 by 16 foot lot. And so I wanted to systematically go over the lot and get a line scan as I'm going. So recording line scans. And so I don't know how well you can see the blue lines there that are going across. So that radar, that mower is a half a meter wide. So that is your kind of your what you're getting when you push it across. So each of those lines is a half meter distance across the entire area. And so I did that. You could do it in one direction, but it's ideally you want to do it in more than one direction. So as you can imagine, graves, they're longer than they are wider, right? So, and if you don't know how they're oriented in the ground, you're going to more easily pick it up if you're going at a right angle to it. So you're going over the longer part in successive, in a successive manner rather than going over the width of it, because you may pick up an edge or pick up the other edge. So it's always a good idea, especially when you don't know the orientation of the objects, to go in more than one direction. So I did two directions, and I went across in this fashion, as you can see on the left, and then in the other way back, I scanned across in 50 centimeter or half meter increments across that 16 by 16 foot lot. And I recorded this video the day I was out there more for my own purposes. So I wasn't planning on showing a bunch of people, and I'm not sure if the sound's going to work either, but I thought I would play this video just to kind of show you here.
Okay. So here we go.
Maybe the people at home can hear the volume, but it's just, it's not important. So
started over here.
Once we get over here, I'll show you here, and push pause and
started right here.
Okay, so so back there you can see the GPR kind of sitting back there. So what I did is right along that line of those two, you see the two gravestones there. Well, there's three, and then the big one, and then the one in the back. But the edge of those ones on the outer edge there, that's where I started, and went along. That was my first line scan right there.
First line,
and
goes right along the edge.
And I kind of took this video so I could remind myself. But the good thing about
that one,
GPS is that it is recording where I'm at all the time. So if I did not have that GPS, I would want to be much more. I would want to set up a grid with
over to here,
so I know that I'm going
22. Then I came here,
adjacent lines. The other nice thing though, this usually
23
happens, is can you guys see where the tires rolled? So if you can see where your last line was, that you just mark, get the tires and line them up and go right next to the next.
Okay, so here we go. 25, 24,
and so you can see my tire marks. You kind of get the idea of how this works.
And on 23,
and as I was telling Corey earlier tonight, you can, but like when you're mowing at home, you wouldn't mow a strip and then turn the mower off, go back, and then mow the strip right next to it, because that's going to take forever. But with ground penetrating radar, I like to do that, because when you put these line scans next to each other, you kind of I like to see the same amount of distance. So if there's an object under the ground and I'm going over it this way, but then I turn around and go over it this way, it might be down here on the line scan for the first one, but then shorter on the way back, if that makes sense. So I went in one direction both ways, and I don't know if we need to play much more of this, but
viewers 29, 20.
So you can kind of see how that worked, and then make sure I didn't skip. Yeah, okay. Make sure I didn't skip any lines. So I didn't know a whole lot about this mound before I did it, which to me I kind of like, because it's always nice when I'm done. I mean, I did know a little bit, but it's kind of nice when I'm done where I say, this is what I found. And then the historians tell me, well, that's kind of what we were expecting, kind of thing, And so as Corey mentioned in the beginning, this, and you, as you all know, this has been perplexing mound for some time in this area. So, some questions you might ask or some different explanations, which you've all heard is this mound a prehistoric mound? And when I say prehistoric, I just mean before written records. Or is it as the historians think, a historic grave vault? Are there burials in the mound? If so, how many? So you have some general questions here, some research questions that you're kind of going for. And the thing is, so you kind of I mentioned prehistoric mounds, and I guess I'm kind of plugging my own research for no reason really, but and it's not like I'm, like when celebrities go on talk shows and plug their shows like that, gives them some kind of benefit. But this is relevant to this in that I've done a study statewide of where prehistoric mounds are located, and so those would be burial mounds, or if you're familiar with Northeast Iowa, like the effigy mounds up there. So the black areas on this map are areas where there are likely to be those types of mounds. The gray areas are maybe, and the white areas are not likely. And so I got an arrow pointing to where our mound is, and it's black there and gray. So I mean, it's a plausible explanation that it could be a prehistoric mound. We're along the Mississippi River here, and this was a hotbed for, I don't know if any of you collect artifacts or have gone out into farm fields. And yeah, if you go out in any farm field here along the bluffs of the Mississippi, you're gonna end up finding some prehistoric artifacts picked up on the surface. And so it's not unlikely that this could be a prehistoric mound. However, before, and the reason that was a question too is because I think the Office of the State Archaeologist kind of had some thought that it could be a prehistoric mound. I didn't really buy that before I even began, because you can't really see the maps very well, but that's the lot map for the cemetery. And what is the likelihood that a mound is going to sit in a 16 by 16, nice, with all these other, nicely organized mounds or cemetery graves, so that would be a big coincidence. And then plus you have these historic documents that they could tell, Koki and Corey could tell you a lot more about, and you probably know a lot more about it than me too, because like I said, I kind of like to not know what's going on there. And so in this particular lot, the Oldendorf lot, there was someone who claimed that lot and someone who wanted to build a vault there. And so that seemed more plausible to me than this prehistoric mound thing. Although, that is what prehistoric mounds look like. And again, this is an area where you find prehistoric mounds. So, and so you can interpret the data two ways. You can interpret it, one, through those line scans that I showed you. Let me go back here. So this is from a line scan. And I want to mention here too, I'm glad I went back to this one, that this is from the site. And you can see those hyperboles there. And I am interpreting where you see the three arrows there, those to be the burials. And then there's an overall kind of, you can kind of see an overall hyperbole there. And so jumping ahead a little bit to the results, I did end up, my interpretation is, and you got to say my interpretation, because again, we didn't go out there and dig this thing up, right? Is that there are three burials in there. And so that's one way you can interpret it, is through the line scans. So going through each scan one at a time, or maybe lining them up. Like I said, I like to go in the same direction so I could line them up and see where I'm hitting things each time. But another thing you can do is three-dimensional analysis, where you, and if you do the grids, like I showed you, in two directions, then you can make a 3D model of what you've come up with. Now, this time slice on the right is not not from this particular case study, but I kind of like this one because it shows. So what it's doing here is it's a time slice. So remember, the radar goes down, bounces off things, and comes back. And so when you watch this, when I push play, it's going to go down, and it's like you're taking a slice in the ground as it goes down. Okay, and then you can start to see things pop up. And in this particular case, there's some trees along the far side, the far right side, and then the graves were along the far left side. And so I'm going to push play here. And so right now it's kind of going down through the ground through slices, and it's showing the graves where they were on the left-hand side, and then you can see some tree roots where those trees were kind of popping up on the right-hand side. And so this is another method you can use to do these time slices in the ground to kind of see what objects are there and at what depth. Okay, so another nice thing you can do in the software, so this is from my software here that I use to interpret the data, is you can put a line scan on the left and then your 3D time slice on the right. And then when you take the crosshairs of your mouse, you can go to an interesting feature in the line scan, and it'll show you where you're at on the time slice as well. So I don't know how well you can see a crosshairs on both, but basically where that crosshair is, it's in the same position on both. So the left image you're looking vertically, and then on the right image you're looking top down at a slice in the ground there. And so the nice thing about doing the 3D analysis is you can see the relationship between objects in the ground, and you can start to pick out interesting things like linear features. So these dark green, you can change the color palettes, but these dark green and are light green and blues and reds, not red particularly, sorry, but can you guys kind of see some linear features on the right side, you know, like some lines and things like that? That's kind of what you're looking for. And so this is a better example here. So you can kind of see, I don't want to go over and point because then I'll get away from my my microphone here, but you can see these linear features by kind of drawing a line across those, and not what we would call anomalies, and then you can kind of get an idea of you know, where objects are that are buried there, if they're in a pattern or if they're kind of separated and that sort of thing. So here is a particular line scan from the 16 by 16 lot, and you could change these color patterns, and they can bring out the changes in the frequencies as you're bouncing off them. And so underneath the surface of that mound, you can see there is something there that, you know, what it is, we don't know, but it could most likely could be, you know, brick structure, or, you know, it's stones or whatever it is, but there is something underneath the ground that kind of covers the whole thing. And so the left-hand side here is kind of some of the ending kind of results that I came up with here, put on, overlaying on top of that drone imagery. And so I kind of came up, the yellow areas are areas that I'm going to say that are relatively undisturbed soil. So in a cemetery, as you can, full cemetery, you can imagine there's not a lot of undisturbed soil there, that when you've got a lot of graves in there. So these, inside these yellow-brown boundaries, I didn't see a whole lot. And you can also kind of tell the layering of the soils or the layering in the line scans that, you know, this has been relatively undisturbed. And so over my area, these yellow areas are what I would say are relatively undisturbed areas. The purple lines are where I saw those linear features. Okay. And so again, I don't know, you know, what exactly, we haven't dug there, so we don't know exactly what's going on there, but at one time there could have been an outline of a boundary, or, you know, whatever it might have been for that particular lot. And then what I found interesting is in the top there was this kind of almost like a hole in the dirt. And you could see that on the line scan here on the right-hand side. And I noticed it as I was going over the mound on the day that I was doing it. And I thought it was, you know, is that because of the changes in elevation or what's going on there? So then I went, after I was done with my 2 grids, I kind of just took the radar on top of the mound and just went maybe a foot, you know, on the level part of the top of the mound. And so I knew I was on level surface the whole time. And you could see this kind of dip here. And so my interpretation of that is that the mound was there and that had been dug out at one time. And so I put the words collapsed, looted there, but I don't, you know, looting, that's I don't know, you know, whether someone looted it or not, I don't know, but there was something, to me, it appeared that something was dug out on the top there at one time. And so that's kind of my interpretation of that. So overall interpretations, you can see on this and that earlier line scan, I showed those 3 hyperboles. And it kind of looked like two of them were sitting up a little bit higher than a bottom one, which seemed bigger. And so my overall conclusion was that there was 3 burials, which it sounds like from what Koki and Corey have put together and others, that matches up, which is good. And definitely there's some kind of enclosure over it. And the thing is this hole doesn't seem to have breached that. If I go back here, you see how it kind of covers here. It doesn't breach the enclosure type of thing. So it could have just been some of the dirt on the top or something. You know, either I'm not sure what's going on there, but it does look like there was some dirt removed from there for whatever reason. I don't know. I left a little bit of time for comments and questions. I hope I did. Where's the elephant? Yeah, I didn't see any elephant bones but so yeah, so what were the elephant, and then there was wasn't there? Yeah. Not very long. I wasn't there for maybe hour and a half or 2 hours. Yeah, I would say a foot might even be liberal. So I mean, you could probably, you know, even get better than that, but I would say a foot would be maximum. Yeah, foot or less. Yep. It depends on the right, on the soil and the antenna size. So if the bigger, some of them you pull like a cart, you know, and even geologically, you separate 2 antennas. So you've got one that's a receiver, and one, if you're going to go really deep, you separate them. So you got a receiver, and then the thing that picks it up, the receiver sends it in, and this thing's clear. It's a completely different piece of equipment that picks it up, and that can go a lot deeper.
About how far down?
Pardon me.
How deep were the graves?
the machine goes down. I had it set to go down 3 meters, which is over 9 feet. And then as far as the depth down on how far those graves were, I'm not 100% on that. I'm more certain that we could get back to the spot of where they are, but as to how far down they are, I'm not real certain on that. I think, just the mound itself is kind of problematic in how far,
You mean like the concrete over it, or is it mausoleum under there, or just dirt?
It's bigger than it's not dirt, I don't think, and I don't think it's necessarily concrete either, but yeah, I'm thinking on something like brick. Yeah. I pardon me. No. Yeah, that particular one, it's smaller, so it's not, but it's around $20,000. No, I rent them. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I've done, I do about 2 or 3 a year. And I've got interest. I went, when I mentioned I went to the University of Arkansas, I went there because I was interested in kind of spatial analysis and archaeology and geological applications. And my advisor there was big on that, and it was kind of the pioneer in it. But then when I got there, he was kind of shifting gears more into this remote sensing stuff, and so that's kind of how I got hooked up in that and taking classes with him and doing different using different pieces of remote sensing equipment.
How does it respond?
Yeah, it'll go through quicker through sandy soil than loamy soil, and so there's kind of a chart you can use that tells you, this type of soil you want to set your settings at this and that sort of thing. But you can get that information from, well, I have a background kind of in that area as well as soils and geomorphology, but and geology, but you could get that information from the soils data, that the NRCS puts out as to in that particular area. Obviously this is a graveyard, so you wouldn't want to do any soil sampling or anything like that, but yeah. Yeah, clay is a big. It's kind of the same as water moves through soil. So, sandy soil, the water moves through just fine, and then you hit a clay layer, it's held up there. So it's the same with the radar. It can move through the sandy soil better, and then when it hits the clay layer, it gets bogged down a little bit. Yeah, it'll and it's kind of, because you're coming in at different angles, and so and if I can see it, go back here. I'm trying to think of what image would be best, but yeah, and I think that was based on what I was trying to bring out in this picture. I mean, you can, so maybe not so much on this, and maybe this particular line scan too, you can't see the graves as well. But I was trying, I think I used this one because it brought out that enclosure the best, but there are other scans where you can see, that enclosure layer and then see under the graves underneath.
are there units you can get, I assume this you can't, units you can get that have enough resolution to find like stone tools?
That might be kind of too small. Too small, yeah. So I would say no. It's something that small.
House, and we've had some archaeological digs over there, but that area next to the water and stuff is a lot of like limestone, like they don't. How does this equipment work in like limestone or hard rock?
This particular unit wouldn't be good for that sort of thing, but there, like I was saying earlier, there's more geological type antennas that would be able to do that. And to go back to the other question too, that that's the frequency of the frequency of that radar, the wavelengths is going to also be a factor in whether whether it can get through things and that sort of thing.
Who have little to no records for platinum, for platinum. Would GPR be beneficial? What's the problem?
Yes, you could still. In fact, I was talking with Corey earlier, and he was mentioning he has a cemetery where I think he said family were buried there, and they had a few, and I've done cemeteries like this before where there's a few headstones, but they know there's a lot more graves there that don't have headstones, and you can pick those up just as nicely. And again, you kind of want to keep in mind that you don't just want to go in one direction, you want to go in multiple directions so you can be more likely to pick up objects of no matter how they're oriented. And the size usually depends on the area size. So this is the smallest that I've ever done, 16 by 16 foot. So, but I think as Corey was mentioning too, with this particular cemetery, it was a half an acre. So, I mean, that would be much more expensive than this was.
But is there any instance where you want to more than two directions, like diagonally?
Yeah, I did. And in fact, on this particular case study, I did do two diagonal lines over the mound in both directions. And I would say the more the merrier. The bad thing about perpendicular is it's not easy to set up grid wise. I mean, with the GPS, it doesn't matter, but if you got a diamond shaped grid, it's kind of, it goes short here and then kind of get longer and then short again kind of thing. So that's the only downside, I guess, to doing that.
And then I have one. Can you tell the size of the grave site? And then if the burial is other than
Yeah, the nice thing with the 3D time slice analysis is you can see the shapes better, and you have to kind of do this this is a technical word and it gets into the analysis, but there's this migration analysis you can do where you take those hyperboles and you kind of set your you kind of just cover the top of it on your computer screen, and then it flattens it out when you see it on the time slice. And so you can see these rectangular shapes and the size of them. So you would see, relatively what they, if they're larger or smaller and that sort of thing. Yeah, I would say it's sending those signals out pretty quickly, but yeah, just a nice mowing speed is good. I don't think so. Yeah, I was looking at I couldn't find a good enough image earlier today. I wanted to add in an image of what a prehistoric mound looks like when you run ground penetrating radar over it. And of course, just like every historic mound like this, each prehistoric mound is going to be unique, you know, but they would have general characteristics. And all of the prehistoric mound GPR profiles that I've seen don't look anything like this. I mean, is that yeah, in the line scans and in the overall analysis, you don't typically see these hyperboles underneath the mounds like that. And the ones that I was looking at earlier, a lot of them just show soil. The thing is these are less than 200 years old, and the prehistoric mounds are more like 2,000 years old. You know, so there's differences in weathering and things too. But they don't look from the analysis and from the eyeball, which this is an art and a science. So there is some eyeball to it, but they don't, when you compare the results, they don't look the same. So that's another reason I would say there's no way this is unlikely to be a prehistoric mound.
Are there grants or programs that could help us or someone?
I don't know if I'd be the one to ask that too. I'm not sure if there are or not. There might be other people in the room that have looked into it, but I'm not real sure. Okay. Okay. So Catherine said the State Historical Society, Archaeological Society. Yeah. No. There's some people, and I don't want to, some people are very serious about this, and I hope there's nobody in this room, but there are people who do witching, you know, and they say that you can tell if it's a female or a male when they go over. But from a scientific background, I don't know about that. That seems ridiculous. No, I shouldn't have said that. Anybody here want to, you know, gonna beat me up afterwards for saying that?
Place where there's no snow and like hot air coming up. Does this work for caves or mines to tell if there's an opening?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because like on that drone data, and if I let's see back here, I thought, yeah, let me go to this one. Along these two purple lines you see on that go, well, like I said, right. Like I said, this one is relatively inexpensive at around 20,000, you know. And that, by the way, that would include that includes the antenna and the tablet and the software that you use. So that's not a bad, around 20,000 would be, you'd get accurate data. I mean, I'm not saying the 7,000 would be bad either, but just kind of depends. They seem pretty durable. I would, you know, this like I said earlier, I've rented the equipment, you know, rent the equipment, and it's getting shipped and moved and used, and they're pretty durable. So I would, you know, wouldn't imagine that you'd have any problems, and especially the manufacturer would probably, you know, for a while anyway, as with all things, would help you out. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Is it the one with the map and this
Right,
one?
that one, yeah.
Well, I shared this presentation as a presentation. So, just kidding. We'll just do it like this. There we go.
Uh-oh, we're ready. I just thought I'd share from the records what we found and why we think it's a burial vault. Knew it was a burial vault. I've gone over the old records a lot, and there were only 2 records I've ever seen. And well, can I walk over? Yeah. It was pretty clear cut when I saw those references. Yeah, yeah. And those are from the old city cemetery records. We have records. Well, I think the actual ones, the printed ones from a sexton who was in charge of the cemetery from like 1860. Is that about when it is? That we have his records until about 1880. So those are from a German-speaking Fritz Kahn is his name. He was the sexton at the cemetery, and he kept the books. And his family had the books at home. And at one point, they contacted Corey and said, "We've got these cemetery books at home. Anybody want them?" So, yeah, that was really, really a good thing. But some of it's written in German and the old German script, and so it's kind of tricky to read. But we're very grateful to have those old records.